Hi everyone. In this lecture, I'm talking about multilinguistic spelling intervention and word study instruction. So, multilinguistic spelling intervention incorporates four skills, including phonological awareness, morphological awareness, orthographic pattern knowledge, and mental graphemic representations. This first example comes from our textbook, and it focuses on the phonological awareness aspect. And this type of activity can be really useful because when working with phonological awareness, developing those skills directly affects the spelling capabilities, as phoneme isolation, blending, and segmenting are skills utilized when spelling words. This example incorporates the spelling component as it allows the student to write down each word in its own box and identify each of the letters and the sounds individually. And with this activity, it helps to match those sounds to their corresponding letters. The next skill is morphological awareness. And this is a very important skill to have when learning new spelling patterns, because with this skill, the meaning between words will be more clear. Identifying relationships between words will be much simpler. It can target correct reading and spelling of derivations of the base morpheme, and it helps identify commonalities among base words and the derived forms. With this specific activity in the picture, the student was given picture cards or written word cards to help them place these words within their corresponding categories, which could fall under they look and sound familiar, they look and sound different, or they look and sound similar but they're not related. And by doing this, the student is able to gain more knowledge about the base words, so like divide, sign, and ready, and start to create larger derived words by adding different bound morphemes. So it really reinforces that knowledge of the base morpheme or the free morpheme, and then those inflectional morphemes that can change the tense or the part of speech of the word or the overall meaning of the word. The third component is orthographic pattern knowledge. With this type of activity, the child or the student is receiving more explicit instruction on the actual spelling rules and orthographic rules of the English language, which will then help them apply their new knowledge of spelling into their writing. With this specific activity, the OA and the silent E and the short O sound are being targeted, and by generating the target word that each question's asking for, the student is more likely to internalize that spelling rule and understand when it should be applied, and will better understand a new word containing that spelling rule once they see it in another reading passage. The final component of multilinguistic spelling intervention is mental graphemic representation. And this is a very important skill that a student needs to learn as they progress through school, because as writing and reading become more complex and the more they encounter opaque words, the less they'll be able to rely on phonological and morphological awareness and orthographic pattern knowledge. As we all know, in the English language, not everything can abide by specific rules. There are always exceptions to those rules. So a great way to practice this skill, as described in our textbook, so I'll just touch on it briefly, is a visualization activity. And during these activities, the child begins by looking at a printed word with the correct spelling and correct orthography. Then they close their eyes or they look away and they are asked questions about specific phoneme positions while they hold on to that visualization. And then they're also asked to potentially spell the word backwards. So they list every phoneme in the correct order, but starting from the end of the word. And this cycle continues until the child feels confident with their own representation, and if they need to, they then study the correct written form once again to see if they made any mistakes or had any other confusion. So to tie multilinguistic spelling intervention with word study instruction, word study instruction is a type of multilinguistic spelling intervention where the multilinguistic spelling intervention is more of an approach to how to look at spelling intervention. It's not a specific intervention type. Word study instruction is. And so it incorporates phonological and morphological awareness, orthographic pattern knowledge, and mental graphemic representations through different types of activities at the teacher or clinician's discretion. Word study instruction is focused on learning word patterns rather than focusing on memorization of words and then just moving on. With word study instruction, the student is more in charge of the progression of learning new spelling patterns, learning orthographic rules, rather than the teacher dictating the progression of the lessons and when and how that student is going to learn those rules and patterns. This type of intervention is beneficial and effective for children with and without language impairments. Studies have shown that this has been effective in reading and writing tasks, regardless of the development period that the student is in. With this type of intervention, it's sort of like structured word inquiry, where it's promoting self-discovery and self-problem solving. With the self-discovery, it's encouraging the child to ask questions and seek out the different patterns in words, because with this sort of self-discovery, it creates more aha moments and will then encourage the internalization of those spelling rules. And then with self-problem solving, that'll lead to determining where there are exceptions in the spelling rules that they've learned. Those concepts can be very hard to understand without going through that process yourself. So this is a really important aspect of this type of intervention. So a typical word study instructions session might look like this, and this is pretty vague to go over, but it gives you the gist of it. So the teacher or the clinician, after assessing all of the students that need to be assessed, will generate groups of words containing the target spelling and/or letter patterns, and they will then present them to the students to study for a bit. And these words can have target spelling patterns or letter patterns depending on what type of skill is being targeted. So overall, the goal is spelling, but if the words are targeting letter patterns, then the child or the student may need to be focusing more on phonological awareness over orthographic patterns or morphological awareness. The second part of a session includes encouraging the students to make new observations and discover new spelling patterns by reading a passage. So it's really about pointing out what they've learned with an unfamiliar story or topic. And then after making those observations, the teacher or the clinician will then reinforce that new knowledge through different types of activities, and then will relate it to what they already know. So an example of this could be the child might have an understanding of the word sign, and then through subsequent sessions, they learn about or are exposed to signature, and the teacher or the clinician can then relate that knowledge of sign to signature based on the meaning of that base morpheme. So that is the end of the presentation. My references include, of course, our textbook by Ukrainets and an article from Reading Rockets that's also attached to the module. I also wanted to mention the video I have in the supplemental resources section. It wasn't in the presentation, but it's a video by Dr. Cardenas Hagen, and she gives a presentation about teaching spelling to students who have Spanish as a first language. And she doesn't use the terms multilinguistic spelling intervention and word study instruction explicitly, but she does talk about the importance of those students speaking Spanish as a first language to develop the skills of phonological and morphological awareness as well as orthographic patterns in order to successfully learn the English language better. So I definitely recommend checking that out to get more in-depth information about how intervention strategies such as word study instruction can be used for CLD populations. Thanks.